And it wasn't until I learned how to print in color and started to work in color that I felt that I could take it to a different place.
You're listening to A Life Creative, real conversations with artists, designers, and other creatives about how they build, sustain, and evolve their careers. If you're a first-time listener, thanks for joining. I'm Melania Gomez, the host of the show. Across my professional life, I've met and admired fascinating creators making a living in the arts. How do they get where they are today? The answer to that question can be found in this podcast. Today's guest is Ngoc Minh Ngo, a New York-based photographer and author. Her work has transformed how we see gardens, interiors, and the quiet beauty of nature. Born in Vietnam, Ngoc's early life was shaped with upheaval. Her family fled to the U.S. at the end of the Vietnam War, settling in California. She's the author and photographer of several celebrated books, including Bringing Nature Home, In Bloom, and Eden Revisited, which explore how to live with and within the lushness of plants and floral design. Ngoc is self-taught as a photographer, and over time, her images have appeared in publications like The World of Interiors, Architectural Digest, Martha Stewart Living, and Vogue. Her solo exhibitions have been mounted in settings as varied as Yves Saint Laurent's Museum in Marrakesh and Wave Hill in the Bronx. In 2022, she was honored with the Land Place Spirit Award from the Longhouse Reserve in recognition for her lyrical and healing visual work. Hello, Ngoc, and welcome to our show. You and I have worked together before at Martha Stewart Living. That's only a tiny piece of your spectrum, your broad spectrum of work that you've been doing in your photography career. And this year you published a book called Roses
in the Garden.
Yep. And I want to get into all that, but before that, I think for our listeners, I think you have to tell a story on how you achieved this incredible body of work. But from the very beginning, you originally were from Vietnam, and your family came to the U.S. in the 70s.
Yes.
And what happened then?
So I was born in Vietnam, and I lived there until I was 12, which was the end of the war in 1975. And so our family came here to the U.S. as refugees at the end of the war.
And so how many of you altogether?
So I come from a family of 8 children. But at the time, one of my brothers was going to school here in the U.S. He was going to college here. So there were 7 of us left and my mother. And we left first. We left just like 10 days before the war ended. And then my father had to stay until the very end. And he made it out, luckily, on the last day.
Culture shock, learning English, right?
Yes.
And then you decided, you were saying that your all your siblings are in computers?
Yes.
And that you're this one person who wanted to distinguish themselves and go into a creative field.
Well, it wasn't always like that. I mean, in a big family, you're always trying to find your own niche.
Yes.
And my niche was that I was always good at school. I was always good in school, and I always had good grades, and I was always very academic. I loved books. And so that's what I always did from a very young age. And I loved drawing. I think my father was a very creative person, and I inherited some of that. But just as my father never had a creative career, it never occurred to me to pursue a creative career, and no one in my family did either.
You were telling me a story, earlier about that you decided to go away for school, and how did that happen? So
living in Sacramento, I was pretty sure that I didn't want to live there for the rest of my life. As a 13-year-old, I already decided that. When I was applying to college, I was thinking that I would like to go to New York. I would like to go to Barnard.
How did you know about Barnard?
I don't remember how I knew about Barnard. I must have found out somehow in my school that there was Columbia University in New York City, and that Barnard was attached to Columbia, but it was a women's school, so it felt safe, for a 15-year-old, however old I was when I was thinking about these things. But then I decided that I just couldn't afford that because I would have had to pay for it myself, as I had to pay for my college myself because my parents obviously had many other people to take care of.
Yes.
And so in the end, I said, well, I'll just apply to UC Berkeley. That's close enough and far enough.
You were obviously also very intelligent to get into into a university like that. So you did well in high school.
I did. I always did well in school. That was the thing. I think being from a family of 8 kids, you kind of have to carve out your niche,
Yes, absolutely.
And from an early age, that was my niche. I was always the good student. I was always very academic.
So you took it upon yourself to apply to UC Berkeley. Did your parents know?
No, my parents had no idea. I mean, they were busy, making a living, supporting this big family in this big new country.
And this is before the internet. I mean, you had to write to the school, get an application, right?
Yes. I think at my high school, I had a lot of help. I think the teacher recognized that I was a good student and I was encouraged to apply. I got some awards, I got some scholarships, so it all helped. I worked at Taco Bell during my high school years.
That I would love to see.
Yes,
you
I had
in the
this
uniform.
terrible uniform, polyester brown,
polyester.
and it smelled so bad that every time I came home, I would have to hang it outside to air it out.
Air it out. Oh,
it was awful. But yeah, I saved up a lot of money.
Yeah.
And then during college, I also worked. So I ended up leaving college with money.
Yeah. But you were what major?
Economics.
And what made you choose economics?
Well, I thought I wanted to work in development economics,
Okay.
Being from Vietnam and just thinking about the whole situation politically and everything. I thought that's where I want to go into to sort of help these countries in a way to develop. But I was very quickly
Dissuaded
because I spent a summer as an intern in Washington, D.C., and that was an eye-opener. I just thought, there is no way I can spend the rest of my life in this environment.
Right. It just wasn't you.
No,
so
it
you
wasn't.
had to do it. Well, I think what's fascinating is in both instances, you went away.
Yeah.
Like you have no fear of going to UC Berkeley, going to Washington, D.C. to figure, well, do I like this? Do I want to try this? And
Yeah.
that's kind of an amazing feat for a teenager, right? So then
Yes.
so you went back to UC Berkeley. Did you graduate from there?
Yes,
Okay.
I did. I graduated. I mean, I had 1 year left, so I just finished.
You just finished it.
So after college, I went to Japan.
Okay.
Because I had studied Japanese at Berkeley. And I spent 6 months there, which was really interesting. I thought that Japan at the time was so technologically advanced. Tokyo, you walk outside and there'll be billboards that are video screens.
Right. Sort of Blade Runner.
Blade Runner, completely.
Come to life.
Yes, and it was a little too much for me. The
Yeah.
Japan that I was looking for was basho.
Yeah.
I know, it's just like it's very
I just
stupid.
want a calm tea ceremony.
Yeah.
Is that possible?
And ultimately at the end of my time there, I did get a glimpse of that. I did begin to understand it better. But I think I fought against it so much when I first landed there, and it wasn't what I expected to find. But anyway, after that, I traveled around Europe, and then I came back to San Francisco because I spent all my money. So I had to get a job. So I got a job at Esprit, and I worked there for a couple of years, and I did really well
At a
there.
retail store or in
No,
corporate?
no, in corporate.
In corporate.
In the office, which at the time was not corporate at all, which is why I loved it there.
I love the Spree.
Yeah, it was not corporate at all. I mean, they prided themselves on not being corporate. It did get corporate later on,
Right.
when it got too big. But at the time, it was still this sort of very hippie culture in San Francisco, where Doug Tompkins and his wife at the time, Susie Tompkins, they built this company, and they got all their friends to work there, and they were not traditionally in fashion. They were from different walks of life, and it was really fun to work there. And the whole culture there was that everyone had access to the top. Like we could walk into Doug's office anytime, which we did because a bunch of us wanted to learn Italian. And we went to Doug and said, "Hey, Doug, we want to learn Italian." He said, "Okay, why don't you find a teacher, have her come here and give you lessons, and I will pay for it." And he did.
Wow.
So it was really fun for a while. But then I decided, well, I don't really want to do this for the rest of my life.
What was the job at Esprit?
So the job that I began at Esprit was a very unglamorous, boring job, and it was called. It was in the Department of Adjustments.
What is
So
clothing adjustments or
No,
Oh.
no, billing
Billing.
adjustments. So I remember, I interviewed with the head of the department. Well, it was two women who were heading this department, and they said to me, "Oh, we know you. You're going to get bored of this job in 2 months." I said, "Please, just give me the job. I need the job."
you just wanted to make ends?
I-
You wanted to make
I-
bread and butter? Yeah, to survive.
I needed a job because I had traveled for a whole year. I'd spent all my money. And so they gave me the job, and I did get bored. But the thing about Esprit was that, again, it was this very open culture. And Doug had this great idea that we would eat really well. That was like way before, this whole...
So the tech cafeteria
Yes.
culture, right?
Yeah,
Right.
but also, more than that, about health. We had like exercise rooms. We had an area like a park where people could run during work hours, during lunch hour, and there would be showers afterwards. So and a beautiful cafeteria with chefs making really healthful, fresh food that was subsidized. Every week you would buy a card for $20.
It's like a punch card.
Yeah, like a punch card. And that would take you through the whole week of lunch, and you would get mesclun salad, which was unheard of at the time. Nobody was eating
I remember. I don't even know what we did before balsamic.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was at the same time.
Everyone was eating iceberg lettuce, and we were having mesclun lettuce, and really great food. So anyway, during lunch one day, I was just sitting there by myself eating lunch, and this man came and said, "Oh, what's your name and where do you work? And why don't you come and see my department?" And he was the head of the sport division. And I came over and met people, and he introduced me to people there. And they said, "Would you like to work in this department?" And I said, "Oh, okay,
So
sure."
he basically poached you from somewhere else.
Yes. And then when I started working, it was the production department for the sport division. And then my boss, this great woman named Darlene Brightwell, then one day said, "I have too much work. So would you like to do some of the things that I have to do?" So she basically wanted to offload some of her responsibilities onto me. And that was to take care of fabrics, to to work with the designers at the beginning of each season to develop the fabric that would be used in that season, get them produced and made so that they can make samples, and then hand the whole thing over to the rest of the team afterwards for production. So that's what I
So
did.
this is where you're sort of learning production in general on like working with somebody creative.
Yes.
Wow.
So it was great. It was a great job for me. She really kind of saw who I was and what I was capable of, even though I had absolutely no experience in any of these things. And working with designers, sort of bridging the gap between production and design. And that was just a kind of a good place for me. And I did that for a couple of years. And then after that, I thought, well, I think it's nice, but again,
I want something else.
this is not for the rest of my life.
Right. Is that a question along the way? It's fascinating to think. Do I want to be doing this the rest of my life?
Yeah.
And how to just keep moving forward for that,
Yeah.
right? Sort of that change.
But it's also about learning. I love learning.
Yeah.
After a while, if I think that, okay, well, that's as much as I can learn there, and then I don't see. I mean, for someone else, there might be more for them. But for me, I just felt like, okay, I think I've learned a lot in this place, but I don't feel the inclination to
continue.
And
So then after Esprit?
So then I went to France.
Okay.
I went to Paris.
You saved up and then you went again.
So I went to Paris and I took a literature course at the Sorbonne.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to do something because I've always loved books. I've always loved, I was always very academic. And when I was in Paris, I realized that, I had always had this love of paintings. And that goes way, way back. Since I was a kid, I used to draw a lot. And I spent a lot of time with paintings, looking at them. And then I thought, well, I think I would like to get into restoration. Mm-hmm. Because I kind of wanted to be in that world. My boyfriend at the time was a graduate student in art history at Harvard. And so he said, there's this school in Florence that you could go to. And so I went there for one summer. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I thought that I could do that.
I love watching those videos. It's very ASMR to me. I follow several restorers of paintings online. And just the Q-tip and taking away varnish off of a painting to get the true color, it's absolutely fascinating. But restoration is really wide. It's furniture restoration, it's painting.
It's painting.
Everything.
It was just painting that
Yeah.
I was interested in. And, it's very meticulous. It's very specific. And also you have to know art history. You have, all of those things kind of was very exciting for me.
How old were you about this time, do you think, all this is happening?
So I came back when I started working in Esprit. I was 22, and when I left, I was maybe 26. So when I went to Paris, I was 26.
Okay, so you came back. Did you become a restorer?
No. So then after my course in Italy, I honestly wanted to stay in Italy. I loved it, Italy, and I love the art in Italy. I always loved being in Florence, but I couldn't afford to stay there.
Yeah.
So it was just too complicated. So then my boyfriend at the time also said to me, well, at NYU they have a program, and a graduate program at the Institute of Fine Art at NYU. Why don't you go there?
For
painting restoration.
For restoration, okay.
And so I did. That's how I moved to New York. They said, well, in order to apply, you need 2 years of chemistry, of college chemistry.
That you probably didn't need in Europe.
That I didn't need in Europe, no.
Okay.
And so my options were to take 2 years of chemistry at Hunter, and being a non-resident in New York, it would have been very expensive. Mm-hmm. Or I could go back to California where I was a resident and take 2 years of chemistry, say at Berkeley or somewhere, and that would have been sort of the reasonable thing to do. But by that time, I had started working in New York with Barbara Rose,
Sort of just freelancing?
freelancing,
Yeah, okay.
kind of a startup that she was doing to publish this American English edition of an Italian art journal. And that was really kind of exciting. I was learning a lot.
You just come from Florence.
I
You're
had
just,
come
yeah.
from Florence, and I was working with Barbara Rose. She was like the American art critic who basically championed American art at a time where American art was not really on the map. She knew everyone. She was married to Frank Stella, and she was a fascinating person, to work for. And so I stayed in New York, and I kind of gave up on the painting restoration.
But it must have still been a good basis for the appreciation of art and just in general.
Yes.
going
I mean,
into your-
I still love paintings.
Yeah.
I just pivoted basically
Yeah.
to a different kind of aspect of art.
And then you also said that you worked on a film, right?
Yes.
And so how did that come about?
I was working for Barbara, and she just sort of had a falling out with the Italian publisher. And then we had to do the whole thing ourselves.
But was she financing it, or
Yeah, she
okay.
kind of managed to find some financing. She
Okay.
got some financing from another Italian partner, this wonderful woman, Vincenza. And we, for a while, published the publication in Italy out of Turin. And we worked out of there for a little while. And it was just really not easy because they were typesetting by hand.
Oh my God! On mechanical boards.
Yes.
Yes.
And in English. And so I was working with another person. Her name was Barbara Nadeo, and she was a graduate student from University of Michigan at Ann Arbor. And we would go over, Barbara had a place in Turin, and we would go over there and work with the printer, and we would spend the day proofreading, and then would send everything off to the printer, and then the next day we get the proofs back, and there would be other mistakes because they were resetting everything.
And cutting and pasting,
Yeah.
and it was the days of non-digital.
Yes. But it was very exciting. It was very fun, I got to do so many things that I never thought I would be doing.
In a way, it is sort of startup. Right?
Yeah, it is a complete startup. That did not exist in the vocabulary at the time, but it was a startup.
No.
And then it was not a sustainable kind of situation.
Was it like biannual? It was quarterly?
No. It was like monthly. But
Goodness,
but I don't think we were doing it monthly. By then, we were just trying to get as many issues out as possible. So that all fell apart. And then a friend of mine said, "Okay, do you want to work on this film? I'm going to do this independent film." Yeah. And I said, "Okay."
You just said okay, but did you know exactly what you were going to be doing? No.
No. Always be open to new experiences.
Yeah, always be open to new experiences. So then you say yes.
So I say yes, and then we looked at a lot of photography books, and I said, "Oh wow, I really like black and white photography because that's what we were doing. We were looking at all these early black and white photography, Cortege and Bauhaus and all of that. Later, I would discover Robert Frank. So that was really my love. I think Robert Frank was sort of my gateway.
Yeah.
Cortege also to some extent. But I absolutely love black and white photography. And on the film, there was a still photographer, and she very, very kindly taught me how to print. And so I set up a dark room in my apartment, and that's how I started. I taught myself. So then, by then I had another boyfriend, and he told me, he told me, okay, this is the book that you need to read. And he was perfectly right. It was Black and White Photography by Horenstein, and I have since then recommended this book to everyone who ever asked me about photography. And I learned everything technically from that book. And
Is it a textbook or is it sort of just a how-to kind of
yeah,
thing?
yeah, it
Okay.
is. It's like everything about black and white photography, and it just takes you through all the basics, f-stops, aperture, whatnot. I learned everything from that book. And my boyfriend also told me to get a manual camera, so then I got a manual camera, and just started taking photographs and printing them, and I was really enjoying doing this as a hobby.
Were
you know.
who was seeing your work? Was anyone, was it sort of just a private thing? You and your boyfriend, that's it? Like no one was
Well,
friends?
friends,
Okay.
yeah, and then I was introduced to a lot of photographers, luckily, who were really great photographers, or who are really great photographers, and gave me a lot of really good advice.
And did you establish a portfolio at that point?
No, at that point, I was doing it as a hobby. And I thought, I got to a point where I thought, oh, I really like doing this, but I don't see how I can get better. Like, I don't see myself having that, extra something that would make me a professional. I was very realistic. I mean, I've always been very realistic in my...
When you think about it, if you go back a bit, do you feel like you were just so hard on yourself at the point?
No, not at all.
Technically, you were.
I know. I was proficient. I loved what I was doing, but I didn't feel like, how you've, I don't know if you ever, I'm sure you have, but you have that sense that, like, this is something that you had some kind of special thing that you can contribute to.
Yes.
Like no one else
Yes.
can do what you do, even if they're much better or whatever, but you can bring something to it that no one else does.
Your stamp, sort
Yes.
of. Right.
So
right.
I didn't have that. I didn't feel that. And it wasn't until I learned how to print in color and started to work in color that I felt that I could take it to a different place. Mm-hmm. And I think because I have always been sensitive to colors,
Yeah.
because of the paintings. I've always looked at paintings, and that sort of sensibility that I cultivated with paintings, I think, is something that I can then bring into my work in photography.
Yeah. It's interesting. That is an interesting aspect. Even in art school, I wanted to be a painter. And you learn early on that either you don't have the discipline or you just don't have the thing that's
I
would look at other people and they're working so diligently, and then I'd be looking at a blank canvas completely polarized, and I'm thinking, I don't really have a voice, to do this.
Right.
And then I switched to illustration, and then I felt like all I was doing was perfecting the style of my teacher. Right? Where it influences you so much. And then, I was like, how can I be an illustrator? I don't have that thing. And then not until type, when I started working with type, did I see sort of this kind of like language that you absolutely love. So it's probably the sort of the same thing.
Yeah, it is.
So you learned to print, and you were actually, you told me that you were printing for other people.
Yes. So when I outgrew my little dark room in my bathroom come kitchen, I started going to this darkroom rental place. And at the time, there were these darkroom rental places where you would just rent a darkroom by the hour, and you would do your work, and then there's a common area where you wash and dry the prints. So when you go out there, you would see everyone else's work. And so that was an education in itself. I got to see a lot of people doing really exciting work, and that's when I got interested in doing color. And I asked the guy who worked there to show me how to print color, and I paid him $20. And after he closed the dark room one night, he showed me how to do it. And then when I started doing it, I started really getting into it. And so one of the photographers who was printing there one day said to me, I'm getting really too busy shooting to print my own work. Would you be interested in printing my work? And so that was my first photography job.
So he basically taught you exactly how he wanted something to be printed, and
No.
oh no,
No.
he just said,
Yeah,
wow.
he was just he just said, okay, this is my work. This is the kind of thing I do.
Right.
And basically I had to print it in that look,
Right, right.
that style. And I did that for a while.
So how long were you at that space doing this work?
So then I went to another darkroom rental space that was smaller, but it was closer to where I live, because sometimes I had to
Work late.
I think I spent a couple of nights in the darkroom, all night.
The all-nighters.
Yeah, all-nighters. So yeah, I was living in Soho, and so this darkroom was down Lower Broadway, just below Canal. So that was much more convenient. But it was a great space. Again, I was learning so much there too, because there were people printing for different people. There was the woman who owns the darkroom. She was printing for Mick Rock, who was like the rock photographer,
Yeah.
And she was printing for Ralph Gibson, who was this great photographer. And then there were people printing for fashion photographers that were like the flavor of the month. So I got to see all these different people's work. Again, that was always a big learning experience.
So then when did you sort of start thinking, you know what, I'm going to gather my images and I'm going to try this?
So it came by just sort of by chance, I think. I was printing. I was pretty happy just doing that because I felt like I was learning a lot and making a living at the same time. This friend of mine whom I had worked with at Esprit, he was Italian, and so he had gone on to work for Fila. And he said, well, Fila is opening up all these stores in America, and they want photos. Would you be interested in doing these photos? And I thought, I never thought about,
Did he see any of your work, by the way?
No.
No. I just love all the people who, sight unseen, said, hey, come and join me.
Anyway, so I thought, I had never done anything like this. This is a very professional job. It was not like making pretty pictures. My boyfriend at the time was assisting a lot of photographers. He had been assisting for a number of years. So he was basically more experienced than I was in that kind of world of professional commercial photography. So I said to him, well, would you be interested in doing this job with me? Because I don't feel comfortable.
As an assistant, like as sort of a...
Well,
or
as
like
a partner.
Okay, partner. Okay.
Because, he had more professional knowledge than I did. He said yes. And so we flew out to San Francisco. We did that. And we thought, this is
Something.
We can do this. It's not bad. We can make this work. And so we did that. And we did a few other stores as well. And then I put together a portfolio and we took it to New York Magazine.
Okay.
And the photo editor at the time was Yvonne Stender, who was this lovely
Did you
person.
have a contact there? It was total cold call.
No, it was cold call because
Wow.
at the time, that's what you did.
Yes, yeah.
Right?
You could find them in a phone book and then, yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
and that's what photo editors did.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
would look at people's portfolios. And so we did that, and Yvonne sent us out to shoot like different things, like little jobs around the city. And it was, again, great experience. And then she sent us to a friend of hers who was a photo editor at Elle Decor. And her name was Quintana Rudin. Mm-hmm. She was Joan Didion's daughter.
Yes.
And Quintana loved us and sent us out on shoots, gave us all these great assignments. And Marion McAvoy, who was the editor of Elle Decor at the time, also loved us. She called us Bang and Olufsen because we were two names and she couldn't remember one of the names, so she was like Bang and Olufsen.
And it was Min and Was was
Yes, it was
and-
Min and Was.
Yeah.
That's what we were. Anyway, so she was great. She sent us out on all these jobs, and we just started working as interior photographers.
Paper Magazine you
Yeah,
shot for.
so we Paper Magazine is another one. It's like a downtown publication. We met Mickey like individually back then. So we also worked like these sort of, commercial jobs as Min and Was. And then individually we were shooting for Paper Magazine
Okay.
on these different jobs that are just more quirky.
So you really had a broad
Yeah.
sort of spectrum of
It was an education.
of portrait, landscape, interior, still life. So you
Yes.
really sort of got your education through all those jobs.
Yes.
And I'm just so impressed with cold calling because by
Yeah.
today's standards, you can't get an appointment by just like an email. It's very,
But
very
don't
hard.
don't people just like DM people?
Yes, probably.
That's the thing today,
Yeah,
right?
probably today. And an account so they can see your images, right?
Yeah,
Somewhere
well,
they can see it.
Instagram.
Yeah,
People
it's a
can
free portfolio.
Yeah,
basically,
exactly.
on
Anyone
Insta.
can just look up your work on Instagram.
And back then, you carried a portfolio.
Yes, you had to make these portfolios.
Yeah. Call from a payphone.
Yeah,
I have an appointment.
yeah.
So then when and that's actually when you were introduced to Martha at the time,
Yes,
right? And then
yes.
so how did that happen? You just sort of was it through a photo editor? You think?
No, I think because then your name start appearing, and then people start getting interested.
Right.
And then we had an agent.
Okay.
Like
Like a rep that you
like a rep.
Okay. Do you like? I mean, you're obviously good with the networking aspect of the business, but did a rep kind of push you over to a more commercial like?
Yes and no.
You were able to say no if you didn't like a job or
Yes.
yeah.
Well, the rep was there to kind of organize things for us when we got busy.
Yeah.
And then when we started getting commercial jobs, because we were doing mostly editorial jobs.
Yeah.
And then she would get us commercial jobs, and she would be handling all of the negotiations and all of that.
Which is interesting that most editorial get you the commercial work
Exactly.
because they can see the
Exactly.
beauty of that you actually do.
Right.
And so then you're going along, but when did your sort of your real passion and style for a particular kind of photography sort of happen?
So we worked, as a team for a while, and that was great. And again, like I said, it was a great education. And then we had our daughter, and I said, well, at some point, one of us is going to have to stay with her at home. We used, when she was a baby, we would take her on shoots, and we would travel with her everywhere. But then and I said, well, at some point, she has to stay home, and one of us has to stay home.
And this is before digital.
This was before digital. Yeah. Then we decided that, okay, then we have to start working separately. And we would take turns.
Sort of tag teaming,
Yes.
taking care of your daughter.
Yes. So basically, I was trying to manage being a mother, being a working person, and just, trying to find my own way through all of this. And I really enjoy working on my own. Mm-hmm. And then just from there, I just started to just focusing more on things that interested me. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that set it off for me was that when I was doing all of these interior shoots, I always noticed that people would bring in lots of flowers. But often they didn't really have any connection to the flowers. Mm-hmm. It was just seen as props. Mm-hmm. And I love flowers, and I love the whole culture that's attached to flowers. And everything from gardening to art to the ideas of nature. So I had this idea that I wanted to do a book where I wanted to show these flowers in homes.
And it's called Bringing Nature Home.
Yes, it's called Bringing Nature Home, but but the focus is more on the nature side of the flowers rather than the prop side of the flowers.
Exactly.
And so I was lucky enough to be able to do this book. And that just sort of gave me the confidence to just carry on that path.
So then how did you have contacts to do the book, or did you do a spec kind of thing?
So I just had this idea in my head. And I have a friend who is this great illustrator, Jean-Philippe Delhomme, and he had just done a book with Rizzoli with his work. And he said to me, well, my editor, he's Vietnamese. You should talk to him.
Working that
Yes. No, but apart from that, he said,
Yeah.
he's a really nice guy and you would really like him. And you would have a lot in common because you're both Vietnamese. And yes, we are both Vietnamese, and he has the same last name as I do. So, and so I met Jung, and I told him my idea, and he said, that sounds great. Let me talk to Rizzoli and come back to you. And he came back and said, yes.
Sight unseen.
Yeah, I didn't have any, people told me, this is how you do a proposal. You have to do this. That. Oh, I didn't have a proposal. I didn't have anything.
But obviously your friend or this editor knew of your work, like could probably, okay, she shoots for so and so and so and so.
Yes. I mean, I have a record.
So how many books in total have you done to date?
I think 6. I think Roses in the Garden is the 6th book.
Yeah. You were saying, and this was a time during COVID, during the pandemic, you worked on your latest book, which is Rose, right? And what was happening then?
Well, so...
Work stopped for all of us.
Yes.
Right?
So what happened was Rizzoli became my publisher. In 2019, I published a book with Rizzoli. And afterwards, my publisher always says, what do you want to do next?
What a nice way. That's a really nice way.
It is very nice. I realize that I'm very, very lucky. Anyway, so I said, well, I think I want to do a book on roses. And he said, yes, sure. That sounds great. And that was in 2019. And I made plans in early 2020 in January. I planned all these shoots that I was going to do for the book. And in March, I went to California to begin my first shoot. I was going to go to this botanical garden in Sonoma. Mm-hmm. And I went early to spend some time with my family. And while I was at home, things started happening. And I realized that I would have to go back to New York. This was March 2020. So everything came to a halt. I canceled all my plans.
All the shoots.
And in New York, months later, a literary agent came to me and said, well, Artisan Books has this idea for a book, and I wonder if you would be interested in doing it. And that was a book on green spaces in New York. Okay. And I said, perfect. I, have never really shot gardens in New York because most of my garden works has been outside of the city. At
homes or
abroad.
Okay.
In England or France or Morocco. So I said, this is great, perfect, And I worked on that during the pandemic. And I really got to see a different side of New York and really got to really appreciate New York so much more. Mm-hmm. And it became kind of my love letter to New York.
Were they hidden spaces,
No, they were not hidden spaces. There were some, you cannot do a book on green spaces without Central Park,
Yeah.
right? But it's more of a book that gives you a much kind of deeper appreciation of the overall history of green spaces in New York, starting from the picture of New York that was revealed to us by Manhattan. This is this incredible book that Eric Sanderson did that basically gave us a picture of what Manhattan, the island of Manhattan, was before Henry Hudson landed, before European settlement. And it was this incredibly rich place with so many ecological habitats per square mile. And it was very vivid. It was very specific. It tells you what grew here, what plants grew here, what animals, all the different ecologies, the different habitats in different places, very specific places, all the geological history. From that to what we have today through the community garden movement, the green guerrillas in the 60s and 70s, early 70s. And then all the newest parks that are informed by Eric's book, Manhattan, that are trying to recreate all of these ecological habitats, like Hunters Point South Park, like Brooklyn Bridge Park, all of those are informed by this book, Manhattan. Wow. So it just sort of gives you an overall view, of how these green spaces have evolved, how our ideas of green spaces have evolved from the time when Olmsted was making Central Park, and that idea was to give people this illusion of being in the country because the city was like this industrialized city that was polluted, that was kind of almost unlivable in some ways, to the High Line where we get to a point where it's post-industrial and there's no illusion of being in the country, but the beauty of it is that
The
you can
appreciation,
have this
yeah.
nature within the city, and that nature does belong in the city, that it has a place in the city, and the beauty of that.
I saw some account that was talking about, the development of Central Park, and that the landscape and the roads are so planned that when you're walking through, it never gets crowded. So you always see beautiful green space, then it diverts you under a bridge, and so that there could be so many people in the park, but you never feel like there's a bottleneck of anywhere in the city. And it's kind of, I used to live up there, and it really is beautiful.
Yeah.
I really, really love it. So I want you to tell this story about that you approached World of Interiors with a Turkish botanical artist, and you tell the story because I love the story.
Okay, so again, one of my interests is botanical art and botanical paintings, and there's this Turkish botanical artist whose work I think is just one of the best in the world. And I took a class with her in Barcelona. She taught. She teaches a lot in different places in the world. I wish I could go all around the world with her to take all these classes. But anyway, I took a class with her in Barcelona, and she showed her preparatory sketches, and she talks about how she goes out in the wild and does all these sketches, works really quickly, and then brings them back home and makes her final paintings. And so it's just this incredible process.
It seems like plein air really quickly, and then comes back. And
yes, because you have to go to these wild places where these things are growing in their natural habitat. So there's so many things that excite me in that whole process, from the beginning to the end product. But I just thought that her sketches were so incredible, and then her paintings were so beautiful. She does these sometimes larger than life size, paintings. And so I said to World of Interior, because I was shooting for them, and I said, this artist, you should really do a story on her. I mean, I could just envision pages of these beautiful sketches and paintings. Her name is Ushuk Gunnar. So they said, well, why don't we just do a story on her, where she works, because she lives in this incredible place. It's up in the mountain. It's this little cabin that her grandfather had built. He had built it in another location lower down on the mountain, and then he had taken it apart at some point and rebuilt it in another place higher up in the mountain. And she works in this little cabin surrounded by tea plant. All the hills are planted with tea plants. So it's green all year round, and it snows, and there's this mist that comes, and it's just the most beautiful.
So you told World of Interiors you should do a story on this woman, and they said,
well, we want you to shoot her place where she goes to work in these, in these wild habitats.
Were you taken aback by that? Were you like,
I said, well, sure, why not? I'd love to do that. I mean, yeah. I wouldn't turn that down.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. So she took me to the Mansour Valley, and we climbed this mountain, and where the crown imperials were growing. And, these things were so...
Were you a crew of people that went, or
no,
just you?
Just
Me
and Ushuk, and the garden editor from World of Interior. She wanted to come, so Tanya Compton. So the three of us, and we were on a road trip. I mean, Ushuk took us to all these places. We went up the mountain. It was snowing. It was just the beginning of May, snowing sideways. We were covered and could barely see anything. We were looking for these small fritillarias that were like this high, about 6 inches high, and it was covered in snow. But then, you could barely see because snow was just like falling in front of our eyes. And then you start to see tiny little pink splotches, and then suddenly you realize that you're standing above this sea of fritillarias. It was so beautiful.
Oh.
And 10 minutes later, we were down the bottom of the mountain. It was sunny, beautiful, warm.
The extremes of the weather.
Yes, it was incredible. It was so beautiful. We went to so many different places like that.
You've had a long and storied career, amazing work, and you talked on our previous call. You talked about what your body of work means in this world, and I don't know if you remember what you said, but I thought it was very poignant, and maybe you could share that a little bit.
Well, yeah. I mean, I have had a lot of time to think about, what I do and what it all means and what it means to myself. And for me, I grew up in a war. But I saw a beautiful world. My parents gave me a beautiful world. And so I think that's sort of been the twin theme of my life, to see beauty in this world of darkness and the necessity of beauty in the world. And I think that's basically what I try to do.
Well, you've certainly summed it up. Oh my God, I can tear it. I mean, it's a really important sentiment in our lives, especially today. Can you tell me the best advice that someone has ever given you?
The best advice I ever got was when I was just a fledgling photographer, and I was so super excited to just go out to the streets of New York with my camera and just taking pictures. And I, like I said, I had the fortune of meeting and knowing these really great photographers, and one of them was Paul Graham. He's this really, really fantastic, very thoughtful photographer. He taught at Yale. He had a show at MoMA, had retrospective at MoMA. So he's a very well-respected photographer, and we used to correspond. He lived in England at the time. He now lives in New York. And I used to write to him, and one of my letters, being this, super excited novice photographer thing, the most cliche thing you could possibly think of. Something about loving capturing the world through the camera. And he wrote me back and set me straight, and he said, it's not about capturing anything. It's about letting the genie out of the bottle. And that, I think, is really key, a crucial key. It was like a key that unlocked everything for me. Because this could apply to anything that you do. It's not about what's already there. It's not this passive thing. It's this active thing of releasing into the world, whatever it is, this goodness, this positive, this beauty. And it's something very active, and it has to come from within. It's not something that you just grab from the outside.
And what advice would you give as far as becoming a photographer?
You mean like a young photographer starting out?
Or it can be
right.
anyone who wanted to sort of switch, or become a photographer.
Yeah.
Is there advice? I mean, you've sort of said it within this sort of podcast that you've taken all the opportunities. You've been open to every sort of step that comes your way. But is there anything else that you would actually tell a young photographer or any photographer?
Any photographer, I think it's what comes from within. And so I would say cultivate that. I think that's the most important thing. To cultivate your own perspective. Think about what you have to offer that no one else does.
That uniqueness.
Yes.
Yeah. And our final question is there anything inspiring you lately?
So lately I have been, I'm writing a book, and one of the things I'm writing about is cherry blossoms, and I have been sort of immersed in the poetry of a 12th century Japanese poet named Saigyo.
Okay.
And Saigyo lived at a time that was very tumultuous. I mean, one of the most tumultuous periods of Japanese history was the end of the Heian period. It was the start of the samurai rule, at the start of feudalism. And he was a samurai who basically renounced the world at the age of 22 to become a Buddhist monk, and wrote poetry, and lived at a time where they were burning down temples, emperors were exiled, there were murders at the imperial court. And even though he had renounced the world, he was very much in touch with that world that he once knew, and it pained him greatly. But he found so much beauty in cherry blossoms and the moon and his poetry. It just still speaks to me, like all of these centuries later, and it kind of reflects the time that we live in. Again, it goes back to that thing about beauty in darkness.
Ngoc, thank you very much. This was absolutely lovely. I've learned so much about you. And,
Thank you.
Gutsy is a word that I would describe you. I feel like you
never thought of myself as gutsy.
You have this quiet demeanor, but, I don't think I could take care of a plant at 17, and here you are going off and just making it happen. And I think that's very impressive. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you want to learn more about our guest today, find links and show notes, visit our website, www.alifecreativepod.com. If you enjoyed the show, please consider following or subscribing. commenting, and giving us a like on whichever platform you're listening on. It really helps us grow our audience. Our producer is Chris Kangas. Our theme music was composed by Pierce McIntyre, and a special thanks to all the amazing people at East 10th House Studio.